Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Children, Young People and Families Cabinet panel. Today's the first virtual meeting of this panel since March, the lockdown in March, so welcome to everybody. I'd first of all like to start the meeting by introducing the members of the Cabinet panel to you, and I'm just going to work through the list that I have, hopefully, of members in attendance. So first of all, could I ask Alan Plancy to introduce himself, please?
Hello, I'm Alan Plancy. I represent Boreham Wood South and I'm with the Conservative Party.
Thank you. Anthony Rowlands.
Anthony Rowlands, County Councillor for St Albans East, Liberal Democrat. Thank you.
Thank you. Dee Hart.
Hello. Hello, I'm Councillor Dee Hart. I represent the Waltham Cross Division, Borough of Broxbourne, and I'm a Conservative. Thank you.
Thank you. Graham McAndrew.
Good morning, Councillor McAndrew, Deputy Cabinet Member and Councillor for Bishop's Stortford Rural, Conservative Party.
John Graham.
Yes, good morning. John Graham, Councillor John Graham, representing Potters Bar East, and I'm a Conservative councillor. Thank you.
Leslie Greensmith.
Good morning, Leslie Greensmith, Goffs Oakenbury Green Division, and I'm Conservative councillor.
Thank you. Lynn Chesterman.
Because I'm on mute, I think.
Good morning, I'm Lynn Chesterman. I'm County Councillor for Welwyn Garden City South and represent the Labour Party. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. Mark Watkin.
Good morning, I'm Mark Watkin. I'm a Lib Dem councillor, the Lib Dem spokesperson for Children's Services, and I represent Nascot Park in Watford.
Okay. Nigel Bell.
Good morning, my name's Nigel Bell. Yes, I'm the County Councillor for West Watford, and I'm the Labour spokesman on Children's Services.
Thank you. Susan Brown.
Good morning. I'm County Councillor Susan Brown and I represent the people of Boreham Wood North and I'm a Conservative councillor.
Thank you. And Tina Howard.
Good morning, I'm Tina Howard, Conservative for Hemel Hempstead South East.
Thank you. And I'm County Councillor Teresa Heritage. I'm chair of the meeting. I'm lead member for Children, Young People and Families and also deputy leader of the Conservative group. Thank you for that, colleagues. I'm now just going to ask our lead officers just to introduce themselves so that everybody knows who's on the call today. So first of all, can I start with Jenny Coles?
Hello, I'm Jenny Coles, Director of Children's Services at the Council.
Okay, thank you. Jo Fisher.
Good morning, I'm Jo Fisher. I'm the Operations Director for Children and Young People in the Council.
Thank you. Karen Noble.
Good morning, I'm Karen Noble. I'm Service Manager for Performance Improvement and Business Delivery Service within Children's Services.
Thank you. Matt Ansell.
Good morning, I'm Operations Director for Statutory Social Work at Hertfordshire County Council.
Thank you. Paul Dryden.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Paul Dryden, Senior Performance Improvement Manager in Children's Services.
Great, thank you very much indeed. It's all a bit weird, isn't it? Because we would see it normally be around the table looking at each other, but thank you very much for that. So Can I just say to make a little announcement before we continue with the meeting? Due to the coronavirus pandemic, the council will be holding this meeting electronically in accordance with the relevant regulations. Members of the public may also attend this meeting in an electronic capacity, and there is a link on the council's website for them to do so. Members of the meeting are asked to keep their microphones and cameras switched off until called to speak, and to switch their microphone and cameras off once they have finished. To indicate a wish to speak, members should request to do so using the chat function. At the end of the debate on each item of business, there will be a vote if necessary. Members should vote using the chat function by indicating for, against, or abstain. I will declare the result after each vote. Officers in attendance will keep their cameras and microphones switched off unless called to speak. I will incorporate breaks into the meeting if appropriate, if we carry on a great deal of the time. So on with the agenda. There are no membership changes today, and at the moment I haven't received any apologies. Do members have any disclosable interests, please? Okay, is there anything in chat? Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat box. There was a little spotlight on there for me. No, okay, there's no disclosable interests. So we'll move on with the agenda if we might. Minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of September 2020, a long time ago. Can we take these as a true record of the meeting? Can you just indicate in chat if you want to say something in relation to these minutes, please? Okay, I've not seen anything, so I'll assume. Did I say September? I'm very sorry. I meant to say 4th of February. I think somebody's indicated that. Okay, so we'll accept those, and at some stage when I get back to County Hall, I'll sign those. Public petitions, we haven't received any. And the first item on the agenda relates to Children's Services Annual Complaints and Compliments Report 2019-2020. And Cam Bangal, the Complaints Manager, will be giving you a quick update. Cam, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, yeah, I'll just share the report. Bear with me a moment. Can everyone see it?
Not yet.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Great.
Right.
Thank you.
I can't see it.
It'll come through gradually, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Because if some people can see it, it should come through. Would you like me to make a start?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Right. Okay. So I'd like to start off with the summary. Because I think it's a good place to start, and then if anybody has any questions, if they've read the report, I'd be happy to answer those. So in terms of compliments, we received 302 compliments last year, and they've gone up by 44% compared to the previous year when we received 210. And it's really good to see the good work that staff do as well as the complaints that we receive. In terms of representation, we received 447, and that has gone down slightly compared to last year when we received 473. In terms of stage 1 formal complaints, we received 262, and again, it's 1% decrease from last year. So when we break it down into social care, We received 167 social care complaints last year, and that has gone up 9% compared to the previous year when we received 153. In terms of education, we received 95, and that has gone down 15% from the previous year when we received 112. When you look at complaints in terms of percentage, the total number of contacts we receive in children's services, it's actually only 1.1% of the work that we do. So that evidence is the good work that teams generally do in terms of the contact that we receive and the work that we do within children's services. So in terms of dealing with complaints informally, so what happens is when something is very, very low level, for example, if somebody comes to the complaints team and says that we want to make a complaint because the social worker didn't turn up yesterday, for example, rather than putting that through the lengthy complaints process, what we try and do is say, well, OK, let's try and sort this out straight away and speak to the team and find out what actually happened and get them a response straight away. So those are dealt with informally. So that's very, very low level issues. And 30% of those were dealt with informally. And that's gone slightly down from last year when we received 33% of them were dealt with informally. And then if we go down to acknowledgement timescales, 99% of our complaints are dealt with within 3 working days. So we're able to acknowledge them, we're able to tell the complainants what's actually going to happen next with their complaint. If you go on to response in time frame, 94% of our complaints are responded to within the 20 working day time frame. That's gone up from last year when it was 92%. What we try and do is, although we have up to 20 working days to respond to a complaint, we encourage officers to deal with them within 10 working days. So out of that 94%, 72% of complaints were actually resolved within, within 10 working days. So that's again gone up from 67% last year. If you look at the outcomes of stage 1 complaints, 45% were not upheld. That's gone down slightly from the previous year. Partially upheld 42%, again gone up from last year, and upheld remained the same. So 12% of complaints have been fully upheld. Then we go on to senior management reviews. We only had 4 last year. We had 34 the year before. And the reason for that is in our corporate complaints procedure, rather than getting a senior manager to review a complaint before it goes to stage 2, we're allowing them to go straight to stage 2. So it reduces the length of time the complainant is in the complaints process. So you will see that stage 2 investigations have gone up by 44. Stage 3 review panels, we've not had any. Local government ombudsman, we've had 38 contacts by the local government ombudsman. Now that's gone up by 36%. But when you look at the summary below, 47% were not progressed as investigations. So what that 38 complaints are premature. What we tend to do is send the investigators what we've done with the complaint so far, and if they think it's been handled effectively by the local authority, they will decide not to investigate. So 47% of our complaints that went to the Ombudsman were actually not investigated. So that's the end of the summary. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Cam. Yep. Nigel Bell, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the report. And it's good. Yeah, it's good to note that there isn't any dramatic changes. And but I just wanted to pick up on a few things. Obviously, the money that's been paid out, or have we not? I don't know if we got to that yet. But I was going to say the money that's been paid out obviously has gone up now, and this is mainly to do with health EHCPs. I just wondered if you could comment on that. And I noticed obviously again that the majority of people that didn't submit any information on their ethnic group, but I'm presuming we're encouraging them if they want to do that.
We are, but we do find a lot of people don't want to, and it's something that is entirely up to them whether they would or won't.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the main thing is obviously that as long as we see, as you've said there, that young people can either access complaints through helping from the council or the National Youth Advisory Service, then obviously that's good. That at least that they know that young people have, if you like, the voice of the child, that they know that they can use one of those too. Then that's a good thing.
Yeah, well, Nigel, I actually personally get involved in any complaints we receive from young people as a complaints manager. For me, it's really important that we hear the voice of the child. They sometimes come to us direct, but a majority of the time they're through NIAS. And what I actually do is I personally review the complaint responses that go out to these young people to make sure I'm satisfied that we're responding to everything, that we're clear. And on top of that, I also offer meetings to young people. So when they've received the stage 1 response, as a complaints manager, I'm happy to sit and discuss that stage 1 response so that the young person fully understands what we're saying as a local authority.
Okay. Thank you.
Can you comment on EHCPs and the fines, please?
Yeah, I mean, those are basically where children with very, very complex needs have been out of education for a period of time. And, you know, it is something that is across the board, really. I work regionally as well with complaints managers, and it's an issue a lot of local authorities have, where it's really difficult to find education for children with extremely complex needs. So what actually happens is, if we've had a child out of education for a number of months, the Ombudsman is fining us between £300 and £500 per month for that child being out of education. So that's where that fine is going up in EHCPs, because obviously the lack of education available for the very complex needs is something I know the services are also working towards improving.
But of course, this is going, compared to last year, though, this is obviously quite a difference, isn't it?
It is, because what happened was the Ombudsman has started, the Ombudsman gave all local authorities a few months to get to grips with the new legislation, and now what they've started doing is penalising local authorities, and it's happening across the board. So it's not just unique to Hertfordshire. I'm noticing this across the region, where complaints managers are saying that's what's happening with them as well now.
Okay. Thank you.
Joe.
Sorry, Teresa, through you. It'd be interesting to know then our comparison with those other authorities.
Okay, we note that down. But can I ask Joe Fisher to comment possibly on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think the point you're raising is one that we've taken really seriously in Hertfordshire, and Cam's absolutely right. It's not one that's unique to Hertfordshire. However, it is in Hertfordshire something we've been taking a lot of steps to address as part of our SEND transformation programme. And two key things that I would highlight in relation to the complaints in relation to school places for children with complex needs. One is that from this September, we have put in place a new funding mechanism so that mainstream schools across Hertfordshire are have the right capacity to provide for children with complex needs within their schools. But alongside that, we have over the past 2 years created over 230 new special school places for children in Hertfordshire, and we're continuing that programme with a very comprehensive building and school capacity plan, so that we have more special school places for children locally. So there's a lot going on to improve and increase that capacity and that provision to address some of the points that are raised within the complaints.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so hopefully we might see an improvement next year. That would be good. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mark Watkin, please.
Thank you very much, Terry. I just wanted to follow on from what Kamaljit was saying about our young people's complaints. I just wonder whether there's some way that we can be given an indication of where their complaints are going and what they're not going. I mean, the nature of why they're complaining, because in the report they refer to 7% complaints, but I'm assuming that those are going through the formal process, not the process you just described using CHIC and the National Youth Organisation. So would it be possible some future time to get some analysis as to what our young children, or young people are saying about the care they're receiving and why they have some concerns?
Yeah, we can certainly ask our officers to create a report. Yes, we can do that.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll bring that to a later meeting, Mark.
Can you repeat that question? I've got a filming in the background as well.
Sorry, bring it to a later meeting. We'll bring that back to a later meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not expecting a breakdown today, but
yeah,
if it's got that information and it could be circulated before the next meeting, that I think would be very informative for me and probably members.
Yeah, I mean, generally, because I see all of them, generally a lot of the complaints we get are from children who are leaving care because they're quite anxious about going out into the big wide world. So, and it's like for any young person. So, you know, sometimes it's a case of looking at where they're being placed. Are they happy with where they're being placed? I'm recently getting quite a few complaints.
Cam, yeah, I think we'll have that in writing, but I think
that's fine. Yeah.
For Mark's purposes, I think we'll also potentially ask our fostering teams to just do a little report around what they're generally hearing from young people. These aren't formal complaints. This is just our young people venting. Probably.
Thank you very much, Terry. That'd be very helpful. Thank you.
A fuller report. Okay, that's great. Are there any more questions around this particular report?
Yes, please.
Sorry, John, can you indicate in the chat? But that's fine.
Oh no, I raised my hand. Sorry.
Yeah, but the format for the meeting is in chat because I won't see your hand because I'm looking at chat. So.
Okay, apologies. I raised a hand.
Okay, so would you like to ask your question?
Well, really, it's a comment, Chairman. I read this report. It's a fascinating report, and it's very well constructed. It's packed full of statistics, and I feel very confident that we are taking the complaints process very seriously, and we're doing great things with it. My comments a little bit. It's really reflection from the position where we sit as almost sort of non-execs overseeing this, and I come on to on the report on sections sort of 14 and 15, where you sort of lead into conclusions. I'm not sure if we've had the full report presented. Is it appropriate just to comment on 14 and 15 at the moment?
Yes, certainly. Cam will get to that one.
Yeah, okay. I'm just going there.
Well, you in terms of saying what have we done with it?
Oh right, yes.
You start off at 13 and you have 15 bubbles. You comment that a lot of this is on a face-to-face with management, and then when we get down to 14 and 15, particularly 15, you come up with 14 things that you're doing. And I just wondered whether, from my perspective, as somebody who dips into children's services on an irregular basis, whether that could be distilled down to maybe 3 to 5 of the key messages that are coming out of here. Because what I found in reading this report, as I said, fantastic report in its detail, but it tended to be down at the operational level. And what I felt was what I needed at the end was, what are the 3 key messages coming out of it? That's just a comment, Chairman.
Okay, fine, that's lovely.
I'll take that on board, and we can look at that. I think we just try and put in as much as we can about what we're doing. So, but I take on board your comments, and maybe we go away with three main comments.
So I think probably that would come into the main covering report rather than the actual report, Cam, for the future.
Yeah.
Okay, take that on board, John. Thanks very much. Is there anybody else that would like to make any comments in relation to this one? No, can't see any hands or chats. So, so the Cabinet panel is asked to note and comment upon this report, which I think we've done. I won't ask you to vote on that. If anybody's wildly against that, just put something into chat. Okay, thank you very much indeed, colleagues. We'll now move on to item 4, which is the Children, Young People and Families Performance Report. Paul Dryden will be giving a presentation. Paul.
Forgot the microphone. Hi everyone. So that should be appearing on your screen shortly. So just to note, we're going through Q1 performance, which is April through June, and that will, and where we sort of can show where the impact of COVID has affected our figures and what the impact that'll be. We'll mention that as we go through. Chair, do you want to do questions after each slide or at the end of the presentation?
How many slides have we got, Paul?
Oh, let me just check. There is 11 slides in total.
Let's. Oh, that's a difficult one, isn't it? Shall we? Let's do it as we go along because it's all different subject matter. So yeah. So colleagues, if you have a question, we'll do it on each slide. Okay. So if you can just indicate in chat if you have something to ask. Obviously, we can take more questions at the end. So, Paul.
No problem. So first, looking at targeted services and early help. So looking at family first assessments. So there's 278 family first assessments started in Q1. And during Q1, we've seen an 11% decrease on Q1 last year. However, that decrease was more prominent during April and May, and during June we actually saw an increase in the number of cases coming in. So while there was a big drop off as lockdown started, we started to see more cases coming in. The big area of concern is the increase in domestic abuse. So typically during 2019-20 financial year, domestic abuse accounted for 22% of cases coming into Families First. And between April and July, that had increased to 33%. So we know that obviously we've heard from the police before that that's an issue, and that's something that we need to keep an eye on going forward.
So, Paul, can I just ask on that? Do we have the statistics yet where there have been children in the house during the event? Do we have those yet?
Yes, we have got that. I haven't got that to hand, but I can share that with everyone after.
Okay, that would be really useful. Thank you. Does anybody else have anything on that slide? If not, we'll move on to the next one. Okay, Paul, next one, please.
So next, looking at requests for education, health and care plans for children with special educational needs or disabilities. So we've seen a drop in requests for education, health and care plans, and that's actually dropped compared with the same period last year by 42.1%. It's a considerable drop, and it's mainly around sort of schools being closed. We've also seen a decrease in the number of plans issued, not by the same amount because some plans were already underway prior to the pandemic, but the decrease was 19.3%. And the other bit of information that we need to share is around the assessments completed within timescale. Even though sort of historically performance has typically been in the high 80% or 90% mark, and that's dropped to 67.5%. The reason behind that is actually that families want to make sure that they've got access to the full advice, so particularly from health colleagues, and they've not been able to access that advice. So parents have actually chose to delay completing the education, health and care plan at this point until they've got all of the information they need. And we are expecting a considerable increase in demand from sort of September onwards as the schools have gone back, because obviously a lot of children weren't in school between sort of late March and July.
Okay, thank you. Anybody got anything they want to ask on that one? No? Okay, move on. Thank you.
Next, we're looking at referrals that come into children's social care. So we've seen a decrease in the referral rate, so that's reduced to 188.1 per 10,000. And when you actually look at that as actual referrals, it's 31% less between April and July this year compared with April and July last year. We've done a lot of modelling and looking at what the potential impact could be, and at the moment we're projecting that we're expecting 673 additional referrals to come in between September and December. And then we've looked at the long-term impact on that. So we've actually looked back a couple of years and looked at a sample of cases and what proportion of those cases end up child in need, child protection and children looked after, and what that would look sort of up to 18 months and beyond. So those additional cases will have an impact sort of over the medium to long term as well. And just to note, obviously, we're looking at putting in additional resource as well to manage that increased demand that we're expecting at the front door.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions, please? No? Okay, next one, thank you.
Next, we're moving on to initial child protection conferences. So an initial child protection conference has to happen within 15 days of the instigation of the Section 47 investigation. Performance has been really strong in May and June, so 91% and 92%. However, the thing that we need to know is actually that while referrals into children's social care have reduced considerably, the number of children that are going to initial child protection conference has actually increased slightly. So we've got to sort of manage the pressures that if there's a further increase in those referrals coming in, that we may see increased requests for initial child protection conferences, which may lead to more children on child protection plans. So
okay,
next slide, it's children subject to a child protection plan. So at the end of June, we had 421 children subject to a child protection plan. So that number had reduced. More recent data has shown that that number is increasing. The numbers are still one of the lowest in the country. However, the numbers are going up, which ties in with the previous data I mentioned about increasing child protection conferences. So that's something that we need to keep an eye on looking forward. Particularly if we see the increased referrals, we are projecting that there will be more children subject to a child protection plan as well.
Okay, next one.
Next slide is number of children subject to a child protection plan for a second or subsequent time. So that's remaining low. It's 16.8%, which puts us considerably below the national average and our statistical neighbour average. There's been a slight increase in those within 2 years, but the numbers are still low.
Okay, next.
Next is children looked after numbers. So the children looked after numbers between March and June increased by 8 to 959. They have since continued to increase and are about 973 as at yesterday. And the main reason for that is it's not more children coming into care. Those numbers are fairly static. It's less children leaving care. So children are remaining in care. Some of it's down to adoptions because there's been delays in the court, so we can't do the adoption hearings, and some of the other reasons that sort of around children not being able to return home because the work, direct work with families hasn't been as possible during the lockdown period.
Okay, Nigel has a question.
Thank you, Chair. No, obviously, I'm assuming, and that's why I haven't asked any questions on the others, really, because a lot of it really is down to COVID. But the same on that question, but also on the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. I wondered if Jenny can comment on, after her meeting last week in the House of Commons and with the leader of Kent County Council and the new the agreement on that. I don't know if she or is she going to comment on that later? Thanks.
I'm happy to comment now, Chair, if you'd like me to.
Yes, that's fine, Jenny. Thank you.
Yes. So as stated there, Hertfordshire, in terms of the crisis that is still happening in Kent, we've taken 21 young people. They are all young people who are 16 years or over, and we've taken those via the regional coordination strategic Migration Partnership, or directly from Kent, actually. Certainly the last 4 or 5 have come directly from Kent and the port. Currently out at the moment, there is a consultation from the Home Office around the National Transfer Scheme and operating a regional rota system, which has been operating in the east of England quite successfully, and also in London. So it's really important nationally we have a sustainable solution for these very, very vulnerable young people. And so our colleagues in Kent, and indeed places like Croydon, don't come under a crisis again like the one that has been happening through the summer. I'm quite happy to take any more questions, but I think it's fair to say that Hertfordshire is is seen as stepping up and doing our best for these young people.
Thanks for that. Thank you, Chair.
Graham McAndrew.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Nigel Bell asked my question. Jenny responded, so no further question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Anthony.
Thank you, Teresa. And thank you, Jenny, for that response. Just a couple of questions. I mean, typically, without naming geographical areas, typically what sort of accommodation are these young people moving into? And secondly, does the authority establish sort of very close links with, for example, the Hertfordshire Partnership Trust? Because as you said, many of them are obviously coming from very traumatised backgrounds, both immediate and longer term.
Most of, in fact, I think all of the unaccompanied asylum seekers, we've had bar one who's been under 16, who was in a foster placement placed by Kent, and we've taken on responsibility for that. They're all young men, young boy, well, over 16-year-olds, and we've placed them together in supportive accommodation. So they have support from staff. Our virtual school link in with them really quickly in terms of getting them into having support around English and educational support. They're also linked in with the Hertfordshire Refugee Council and also our colleagues in the adult learning, particularly around learning English. So there's a variety of services wrapped around them. They also have support from our Looked After Children's Health team, and who've been working with them in terms of doing health assessments. And obviously, when those recently, when those young people have arrived, we've abided by the 14-day quarantine, and the accommodation they've gone to has made sure that that's put into place.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Jenny. Can I just remind colleagues that please indicate in chat if you want to speak and not put your hand up, because I can't watch both. All right, so thank you very much for that. Okay, Paul, if you'd like to carry on, thank you.
So move on to the next slide. So this is children looked after with 3 or more placements. So you remember historically our performance was typically around 12.5–13% of children who'd had 3 or more placements in the last 12 months. One of the positives that seems to have come out from the whole COVID thing actually is that placements have become much more stable, and that's despite obviously the additional pressures on carers, such as things like schools being closed. The carers and the social workers supporting that have done a really good job in making sure those placements remain stable, and that dropped down to 9.7% in June, and it's now about 8.5%, so it's continuing to improve. So that's a real success story.
Thank you, that's really very good. Graham, please.
Yeah, I think this is a really good piece of work by the officers and being able to reduce the CLA with 3 or more placements. It's been a difficult challenge over the years, and it looks like that we are now sort of getting on top of it and heading in the right direction, and hopefully we can continue in this vein. Thank you to everybody involved. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Leslie.
Graham has actually just said exactly what I was going to say. It's really good to see these better stats for the children in care. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, there's been some really hard work about working with children and listening to what they're saying. And I think that's really important. We need to listen to them. So excellent. Next slide, please.
So next is looking at children looked after exiting care via adoption or special guardianship order. So we've seen a reduction in those leaving adoption. So at this point last year, it was 11.2% in the last 12 months, and that's dropped to 8.7%. And for special guardianship orders, it's 16.1%, and that's dropped to 9.3%. It's worth noting that the 16.1% was a bit of an outlier. Typical performance in previous years was about 12%, so it is down, but it's not as drastic as it looks on that chart. And most of that is down to delays in the courts and getting orders through the courts, and that's starting to unblock now, but they're still sort of working through the backlogs, basically.
Okay, thank you. Anthony.
Muting myself. So I'm just going to get the video to. Oops, there you go. Look, thank you. Yeah, just the comment which has just been referred to about the delays in the judiciary and the court system, and obviously that comes up in a number of other areas that Children's Services covers. I wonder if someone could just say a little bit more about, and there was an allusion just in the last comment that things are beginning to unblock, but this is such a crucial part of so many aspects of Children's Services. I wonder if someone could just comment upon what, on the ground evidence there is that actually we are, now seeing the procedures being speeded up to the level that we would expect them to be at.
Yeah. Matt, thank you. Matt Ansell.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, the work we've done around the courts has been really important since the lockdown. Myself and the head of legal have had weekly meetings with the court and the lead judge to really work at quite an operational level to make sure that we were prioritising the most urgent of cases through the court system. What the courts were able to do is they continued to hear initial hearings, so we weren't avoiding bringing children into care where we needed to via the court process. So we were able to have virtual initial hearings. What the court weren't able to do during the sort of the lockdown period and since has been having complicated, complex final hearings where the court would need to hear evidence from a number of expert witnesses. So that's been the main challenge for us. We are moving that forward. We've worked really closely with the courts, as I said. We've set up a temporary court in one of the HCC buildings, which is now being utilised, and the court in Watford is also starting to sort of hear hearings in the way they used to. Inevitably, what's happened is that obviously we've had to delay some cases getting to final hearing, but we've had a continual sort of a steady flow of new casework coming into the system. So it is going to take some time to sort of unblock and sort of get those cases through the system. But obviously everybody within the court system, both ourselves and CAFCAS as the independent body that oversees the child's voice within the care system and the court system, are all working really hard to make sure that those cases are moved through as quickly as possible.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Is that all right, Anthony?
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep. Great, lovely. Any more on that particular slide? Okay, next one then, Paul, please.
So this is the last slide, and it's just looking at care leavers aged 17 to 21 who are in education, employment or training. So as you can see from the chart, that has actually reduced between March and June for the first time in about 6 to 9 months. It's gone down to 52%, and it's the first time in a year where it's dropped below the national averages. Obviously, the national averages and statistical neighbour averages were compiled before the pandemic, so we would expect those to drop when those are published. and it's just sort of noting that the effect that the pandemic is having on young people, particularly those from vulnerable groups, such as children looked after, care leavers, and those with special educational needs. And we are working with those young people to make sure that they're supported as best as they can be.
Yeah, so I think, yes, the comparative stats are totally out of date, bear no resemblance, and just listening to colleagues around the region and nationally, we're all in the same boat, and the LGA is doing a piece of work with government on this. But Mark, you have a question.
Thank you, Terry. Yes, clearly this is a very fluid area, I fear, because obviously with the recession that's just beginning to seriously bite, and with the furlough system coming to an end, do we have any thoughts about where we go next, and what we're trying to do to offset the likely loss of opportunities for young people?
Jo, are you able to comment on that at all?
I am. Sorry, I'm just turning on my camera. Thanks, Terry. Yes, I mean, Mark, like you, we all share huge concern, because the recession will, of course, provide huge barriers for lots of people, including young people, who tend to move into work and industries that are going to be particularly hard hit by the recession. We are doing a lot of work on this. As you know, the government have announced various strategies to support internships, apprenticeships, work-based training. And within Hertfordshire, we're really looking at how we as a council, but also as an enabler of other employers, can facilitate those sorts of opportunities for young people. We have already extended our monitoring and tracking of school leavers in Hertfordshire to go beyond the school year. So those leaving school, we're actively tracking and monitoring them so that we can put in place support for those that we are concerned might fall into unemployment and not progress into work or training. It's early days in terms of being able to give you any concrete stats on that sort of thing, but certainly there's a lot of activity to make sure we've got the right support packages in place for our young people.
Okay, thank you. Is that okay, Mark?
Yes, that's very comprehensive. I mean, clearly it's something we're going to have to watch closely over the next, well, 6 months, year, whatever, until we see some kind of stability. So I think this is a key area for us to be keeping our eyes on, that's for sure. And thank you, Jo, for that very good answer.
Thank you. Dee.
Thank you, Teresa. Could I ask, could we be given a breakdown of figures per district, please? Because I do feel that with partnership working with local charities, voluntary organisations, we can actually improve on these statistics, you know, as soon as possible, which will benefit young people. Thank you.
Yeah, Dee, Jen has just reminded me that there's a report coming to November, so we can look at potentially the district situation there as well. I'm sure Paul's listening to that one. We'll see what we can work out. Is that all right?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Appreciated.
Lovely. And Jo is telling me that we can include the district's information. Okay. So we've come to the end of the presentation. Do colleagues have any more questions for officers? No, I don't think so. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for that, Paul. Excellent, as always. Oh, there's somebody
Terry,
else.
I have something to say.
Hang on.
Comment.
Sorry. Susan, yes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your report, and it's no surprise really that the impact that COVID has had, and I think we would all agree, and I wonder if it should be noted, our grateful thanks to all the hard work of the foster carers, the officers, the social workers in these unprecedented times. You know, there's so much this has impacted on so many families, and just thank you for all your continued good work.
Okay, thank you for that, Susan. Yes, that will go down well with officers. Thank you very much for that. So we've asked to scrutinise the performance and comments, which we've done. So I think everybody's happy with that. So if we move on to the next, I suppose the main report that we have today is the response to the COVID pandemic. I know that, Jenny, you're going to say a few words before, and then Matt will give a presentation. So, Jenny, do you want to say a few words?
Yes, yes, just to introduce the report. The report and the presentation covers the work we've done, but also the preparations that we're making for the anticipated pressures that Paul talked about in the performance report. So it covers the whole range of our work, and please feel free to ask any questions. We're all here to help and assist and talk through. Thanks very much.
Lovely, thank you very much. So Matt, over to you. We'll take questions at the end, colleagues, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Chair. Yeah, as Jenny mentioned, there's quite a comprehensive report that sits alongside the presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions around any element of that at the end. I'm going to cover some of the slides, and Joe Fisher's also going to come in and pick up a couple of the slides. And I think Karen's going to very helpfully help me move the slides on. So if you could move the next one on, Karen, please. So, I mean, Paul covered the majority of the performance headlines in the slides, but I mean, needless to say, what all local authorities experienced around the country, as did Hertfordshire, was a decrease in the volume of work coming into the front door teams, our family first teams, and into children's social care during those initial months of the pandemic and the lockdown. And the graph sort of indicates that. What we have seen as the months have moved on, and certainly last month's data, is an increase in contacts into our families first. And so it really highlights the importance of our ability to respond to families from an early help perspective and have a really strong early help offer for families. And so we can work with families at our earliest opportunity and also, where possible, stop families needing a sort of formal statutory social care response. If you could move that on for me, Karen, that'd be appreciated. Thank you. And again, like Paul's slides, that just indicates the percentage that we were lower than our same period last year. So 31% for the April-July figure from the 2019% lower. And again, we've already covered in the conversations earlier, we've got some delays in our court processes, which is impacting on how we can move children that are in care into permanent placements, and whether that's permanency via adoption or a special guardianship order, or sometimes actually returning home to their parents or another family member. And so that has been one of the sort of the big contributing factors to why our children looked after figure has increased over the last few months. Thank you, Karen. I'll leave the slide and let Jo cover that when she talks about sending her slides. So just move on to the next one, please. Thank you. So I guess really to sort of focus in on what we've been doing as social work practitioners during this time, it's obvious to many people that the pandemic's had a significant effect upon families, both in terms of potentially financial impacts, isolation, issues of mental and emotional well-being for families and children and young people. And so we anticipate that there could be a build of demand in the system that could come through to us over the course of the next few months. But really importantly, from the outset, back in March, which seems a long time ago now, our social workers displayed a huge level of commitment to the children that we're already working with. And we maintain contact with all of our children and young people that are open to children's social care, either on a child in need, child protection, or our children that are looked after. And much of that initially was virtual, so we introduced the use of WhatsApp to keep engaged with families and children, and where families' children didn't have such technology, we provided that support for them. So we managed to provide a number of ways to stay in contact with families during those initial weeks and months of the lockdown period. And then we also made sure that we were risk assessing where it was necessary to go out and visit children. So where we did have an urgent child protection matter, we worked very closely with our colleagues in police and health to understand how we could visit those children and those families in a safe way, to make sure that we weren't putting anybody at risk in terms of the pandemic, but also to make sure that we were fulfilling our safeguarding duties and visiting children and seeing them face to face where it was really necessary. As we've moved through the months, certainly by the end of May, we were increasing our visits to children, our direct visits to children. We were using the necessary guidelines that were being issued from central government, so making sure that our staff were sort of washing their hands regularly, sanitising, were observing social distancing, but we're equally able to go and see children and families, often meeting them in gardens or in outdoor spaces, or if they were going to a family home, keeping those visits to a sort of a minimum as possible. So doing quite a lot of the work beforehand, either on the phone or via a WhatsApp video, but then also going into the family home and making sure that we were seeing children where it was appropriate and necessary. We've already talked about placement stability. I mean, I think as officers, we did a huge amount of work that prior to COVID over the last 18 months, but also what we've seen, one of our concerns going into this process was around placement stability, and would the pressures within families' homes cause placement stability to increase for children. Actually, what we have seen is a reverse. So we've seen a huge commitment from our foster carers and our residential providers and our own residential staff in Hertfordshire to really commit to and do everything they could to support children in their care, and it's really recognised by ourselves. Thank you. So as we've moved forward, we are continuing to make regular contact with children and young people. As I've said, we've had to provide a fortnightly reply to the Department of Education around our level of contact to children that are on child need and child protection and children looked after. We've done that on a fortnightly basis, and our returns have always been very high in terms of the percentages of children that we were visiting and seeing and keeping in contact with. And that's been an absolute focus for the social work teams, because obviously one of the areas where children would normally be seen on a regular basis and also have trusted adults is obviously in school. And obviously during those initial months, from the sort of middle of March certainly to sort of May time, even though vulnerable children were supported to go into school, many of them weren't. So the contact that children's services staff were having with these children and young people was really important. We developed some practice standards right at the beginning of this process to support our staff to work in different ways, and those practice standards are very much reflective of what's happening nationally around good practice, but also we've made use of our contacts with the Eastern region and shared what we were doing in Hertfordshire with our Eastern region colleagues, and sort of shared learning across all of the authorities in the Eastern region, which has been really beneficial. We've reviewed our practice standards on a fortnightly basis, and we've had to adjust them and develop them as we've gone through this process as the national picture has changed. One of the things we've done from the outset, and I hope we've done it as well as we could, is to really engage with our staff and really wanted to make sure that we were understanding how we were going to respond to families from our staff and working together with them. And so we've held a number of events virtually with our staff to keep engaged with people, to make sure that they've provided that sort of their own support, because they overnight moved from being very much office-based and having the support of colleagues around them to working at home and being quite isolated. So we've put in place a number of processes to make sure that we keep people engaged, and we've kept that sort of emotional support element to our own staff. Thank you, Karen. So some of the additional things that we've done, we've provided the virtual school provided a significant amount of support to our children looked after cohorts to make sure that they've stayed engaged with education and make sure that as much as possible they can remain on track in terms of their education development. And obviously we see that as a vital part of our responsibility for our children looked after. And so the virtual school have been working incredibly hard with foster carers and residential staff and our children to make sure that that's happened. and Jo will pick up the toolkit that's been created for Send when she talks about her slides. And the other thing that we've done is we developed some additional performance indicators to make sure that we were monitoring our most vulnerable children during this process. So we've added a number of additional forms into our electronic recording system, which enabled us to ensure that we were understanding what was happening for children and young people. And this has included a sort of priority checklist to make sure that where cases were of concern, that senior managers were aware of them and providing some additional oversight. And we've also developed a form in our system that allows us to monitor which children are in school. And that's very much something that we're currently working on to understand the cohort of vulnerable children that have gone back into school since schools reopened in September. Thank you. Jo, did you want to pick this next two slides up?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just coming in now. Thank you. I don't know, Karen, whether you wanted to flip back to the Send slide right at the beginning, but oh, good, thank you. There was just a performance headline, but as Matt said when he was presenting, Paul pretty much covered this off. So just to reiterate the point already made, really, the requests for EHCPs fell during the lockdown period. And as Paul explained, that was primarily because schools were closed, other than for the most vulnerable of children, and parents chose to delay both requests for EHCPs, but also delay getting their EHCPs finalised so that they could get the full range of advice and support included in their EHCPs. Schools are now fully back and we are seeing a rapid increase in requests. So we are at the moment making sure we've got the capacity and the flexibility to respond to that. And I'll cover that off in my next slide. So Karen, could you now flick forward? Thank you very much. At the onset of lockdown, one of the things we did was put in place some very clear partnership work with schools, settings, including specialist settings, to ensure that every child with an EHCP in school had an up-to-date risk assessment to consider their education and health and social care needs. Part of this included considering whether a child could have their needs safely met at home during the period of lockdown. A number of parents and schools assessed that this was in their child's interest. Many of these children have complex needs, and I'm sure you'll understand that they wanted to keep their children at home during the height of the pandemic. A small number of children were considered to be better off and have their needs better met within a school or early years setting, and we facilitated that return both to their home school and for a very small number of children, places in new schools for a short period of time. And it's around 12 to 13% of children with education and healthcare plans during that immediate period, the summer term, were supported within school. The vast majority were safely looked after at home. We also put in place very clear processes for monitoring any child with an education healthcare plan that either a school or indeed a parent had concerns about, and arranged a range of wraparound support for those children. That included short breaks and respite through to face-to-face or online support for children, access to IT and laptops, or use of school playgrounds so that they could get out and play. So a range of support was put in place. We also created a very comprehensive range of resources for schools and parents in terms of online learning and mental health support. Our local offer included updates on coronavirus and changes to services, as well as information support for settling children back into school and making sure they get the right type of help. We have an online Send helpline that started in March and now continues, and that's both for parents and carers. as well as schools, so they can get that support from specialist advisory teachers and education psychologists. And I guess a key point to make is that we did all of this in partnership with Hertfordshire Parent Carer Involvement, so HPCI, to make sure that that element of co-production and partnership work with parent carers was very much at the forefront of what we delivered. The mental health pathway, there's been a lot of support put in place there. There's a mental health helpline. There's a lot of resources, including our education psychologists, who develop a package of support so that schools could really think about that transition back to school, particularly for children with very complex needs or high levels of anxiety, and what schools could put in place by way of making that transition both supportive and a smooth transition back to school. Moving forward, do you want to move to the next slide, Karen? In terms of moving forward, we have done a range of things. One is we have last week asked all schools to refresh their risk assessment process and to let us know if any children are either not returning to school or that the school or parents are concerned about that return to school, so that we can make sure that we've got a very clear wraparound multi-agency support package in place. We are aware of a small number of children who need that additional support, and those are typically those children with very complex health and care needs. And we're working closely with parents and schools to facilitate that return. We are also, as Matt has outlined, making sure that our staff are facilitated to work in different ways. So that's both continuing the online provision, but also supporting staff where appropriate to go into schools and homes and provide that face-to-face contact, which for many children with very specialist needs is absolutely vital. The Back on Track, there's a whole range of resources and support for primary schools, which has been launched by Hearts for Learning, so that it helps the schools and early years settings to put in place their sort of strategic plans, but also make sure that their curriculum is really up to speed and flexible, so that pupils can get back on track with their learning. And I've already mentioned the sort of recovery curriculum to support the well-being and the trauma that many of our children will have experienced, and making sure that the schools are equipped with the right level of advice and guidance to really help those children back into school. The Play Your Part campaign, which we're promoting through our social media channels, has really been expanded to cover all the returning school messages for families. So very much strong partnership and work with schools, public health and other partners to make sure we've got that toolkit of materials for to make sure that pupils are appropriately supported back to school, and indeed that the transport for children is safe and flexible. There's a whole range of opportunities that we've put in place, and further information has been presented to the Education Libraries and Localism panel. Karen, thank you.
Happy to pick this back up, Joe, if you want to. Lovely. So it's been really important for us during this period to, as always, to recognise the Black and ethnic minority community, both in terms of our staff, but also the families that we work with, and in particular in terms of COVID. Really making sure that we've been working with that community in a way and being very conscious of making sure that staff feel safe, but also the families that we're visiting have felt safe when we've needed to visit. We did a significant piece of work of our staff around the Black Lives Matter campaign. We held a number of forums talking to the staff around BAME issues and what they wanted for us to do and focus on at the County Council, and also to involve people at all levels in the planning of that. And in terms of the communities, YC Hertfordshire have continued to do their work with the BAME communities, and they've also undertook a large survey with young people, which will again also help us to inform our youth strategy and the work of the youth councils going forward. So there's been a number of strands to our response to diversity issues, We've continued, as always, to make sure that all teams at all levels talk about diversity issues within their work, but also in terms of really thinking about how those particular diversity issues interact with the COVID pandemic and the issues around that as well. So the two different elements have come together in many ways, and we've made sure, as I've said, that teams at operational level are focused upon that, and ultimately ensuring that they are keeping themselves and the families that we visit safe. Thank you, Karen. So the way we work and moving forward, you would have seen hopefully on the slides our slogan that says "Children's Services Our Way Forward." This came out of one of the interactive sessions that I've talked about already, that was held by Jenny and a number of the sort of senior managers in children's services, and we talked to our staff around how they wanted and saw the future in terms of how we were going to continue to deliver services during the pandemic, and our way forward was something that came from a member of staff as something that they felt captured the way we wanted to work. So we've been working really closely with our staff. We've got 4 work streams that look at various elements of our work. One of them being a frontline work stream, which I chair, and that's been really focused on thinking about how we deliver our frontline services, certainly through the pandemic, but also into the future. We're doing a lot of work both at HCC wide, but also children's services level around how we're going to bring staff back into the office and what that will look like and when that will be. We're looking at how we can reopen the touchdown bases around the county to support staff when they're out in the community visiting families, to be able to go to places and touch down. And we've also made sure that we've undertaken an individual risk assessment of all staff where it's necessary. So we do have some staff that have been back in the office during this process due to their own specific circumstances. They're quite small numbers, but each person has had a risk assessment which will be ongoing reviewed in their supervision. We've published, and we're always reviewing our guidance around how we're going to engage with our families and children and young people, and where necessary how that can be visited in our offices, on our sites, and how we make sure that we keep those people safe and obviously our staff safe. And as I say, that guidance is reviewed regularly and changed in line with how the government guidance changes. We've introduced an IT programme during this process, so we've obviously had to make sure that all of our social work staff initially could access the system and work effectively from home. We're offering a change of technology kit for individual staff to enable that to happen, because as we've moved through this process, it's become very clear that we wouldn't be returned to the offices after a short period of time. So that's been an ongoing piece of work, and that's been well received by our staff. We've made sure that PPE is available for staff when they've had to visit families, either in the office or in family homes, and we've continued to make sure that's available for our staff, along with the guidance that I've already talked about around the hand washing and the social distancing. So we've continued to make sure that we've provided the relevant guidance and support to our staff to enable them to do their job in the communities. And as I've already talked about, we've really engaged, hopefully, our staff in really understanding what the learning has been over the last 6 months. There's many aspects that we've had to do over the last 6 months that we will continue to do and take forward and have learned from. So there's lots of learning that we can take into a new way of working, and we're working with staff together to make sure that we identify that learning and use it going forward. One of the real strengths, as always, in Hertfordshire is the way the partnership work together, both at the executive level with Jenny and her peers, but also on operational level. And we've held weekly operational meetings that I've chaired with all of our key partners to share information, to monitor contact with children and young people, and just to make sure that the partnership as one were responsible for responding to safeguarding issues for children in Hertfordshire. And that's been a real strength during this process. Thanks, Karen. So Paul's already talked a little bit about this, so I don't intend to say a huge amount in terms of the demand itself, but what I would say is that there's been a significant piece of work undertaken around trying to understand what the impact of the COVID-19 lockdown period will be, and what that will what we will see in terms of referrals into both early help and children's social care. And we're monitoring that very carefully on a week-to-week basis. We don't anticipate a significant surge immediately, but we think there will be a build of work over time between now and up until potentially the new year. And then what we will see in children's social care is that if we do see an increase in activity, if those children end up in the system, so if they end up needing child needs support or child protection planning, we tend to see children in our system from anywhere between 6 months to a year and a half. So the long-term impact for children's services of this pandemic is significant. Thank you, Ken. Joe, I didn't know if you wanted to just briefly say anything about EHCP. I think we've covered most of it.
No, absolutely. I think I've covered this, but just to reiterate the point, I guess, that we are anticipating and preparing for that increase in requests for EHCPs now that schools are back. We're beginning to see it happen, and we're building capacity at our sort of education and send front door to make sure that we've got flexible staff that we can move around the system to address need as it occurs. And our commissioners are all also modelling for the future demand for home care services and respite care and shared care to make sure there's a sufficient supply and that can continue as well. So, yeah.
Thank you. So I think this is our last slide. So sort of in summary, in terms of thinking about the financial impact and the risks to the services, we're potentially looking at cost increases around our children looked after placements. We've already talked about that fewer children have been leaving care during this period. The potential need to bring in additional workers, which we've already begun doing, to make sure we can manage that predicted increase of referrals coming into the system. And what we intend to do is have a team that we can move around the service and move them into early help if that's necessary, or into statutory social work responses if that's required. So we're intending to do that and be able to respond to any increase in referrals over the coming months. We've already talked about the home to school transport and the social distancing requirements, which is causing a cost increase for us. And then finally, the loss of income by the music service due to school closures. So there's a number of elements to the financial risks that we've been working on really carefully at board level, and Jenny's been talking about with the chief exec and others. And I guess finally, to sort of say in summary, is that what we've I think been able to do, and it's really a reflection of the dedication of our staff, is we've been able to maintain services throughout this period. So we've maintained our performance. We've also maintained contact with children and families, which is obviously the most important part of our work. And we've ensured that where necessary, we've safeguarded children. And I think that's the important message that I wanted to get across. Happy to take any questions.
Terry, you're still mute. Sorry.
It's got a mind of its own, isn't it? The hand flashes back over the microphone, so you don't know what's happening. Yeah, I'm just saying thank you very much. And I'd like to add my thanks to all the staff for the work they did over the COVID period, and it's still ongoing, obviously. We're still there. We're not out of it yet. We'll now take questions. I have Nigel, Lynn, Leslie, then Dee, and Anthony. So Nigel, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks. Add my thanks, obviously, to Matt and Joe for the very comprehensive report that we've just had, and thank you, and to thank all the staff for all they've done and they're doing. Just going back to Matt at the beginning there, he talked about, obviously, as we know, there could be increased homelessness and rent issues, obviously, when the furlough ends. And I'm assuming, obviously, with our vulnerable families, that you will need to have, and you will have, closer working with the districts when it comes to, obviously, housing and any other issues there. And then obviously you said in one, or it says in one of the slides, that obviously all our families, or lots of our families, found it difficult to cope with the isolation, anxiety, and obviously the general disruption. And I wondered if after now the lockdown ended, but obviously we're still at a critical stage, if he feels that the majority of families are now getting over that, or they have been able to cope with measures you've put in place. I was also interested and pleased to see that you said, obviously you and all staff, the senior officers have managed to talk to other managers about any issues that their staff are having and where they're struggling, and where you've been able to pick up if there were weak points, how you've been able to help. And on the EHCPs that Joe mentioned, are we confident then that all families who have children with EHCPs, that they now do have a way of accessing and know how they can access any help that they need? Sorry, that's about five things. Just, can I say finally then I won't need to come back. On diversity, I was obviously pleased to see the work that you've done with BAME communities, and I just wondered what questions have come back maybe from our BAME families who obviously are affected in children's services, and on the other side for our staff and our officers, how they felt about any questions that have come up. You know, what have you had from BAME officers and staff about any issues that have arisen, and how you've been able to help, or how they've been able to suggest things and we've been able to take things on? Thank you.
Okay, fine. Thank you for Nigel. So first of all, can we go to Joe, who can offer comments on homelessness, and could you cover off EHCP at the same time, please?
Yeah, I'll do the two. I guess between Matt and I will try and address all of Nigel's questions. So thank you, Nigel. Yes, just on the homelessness, you're absolutely right. We are aware that now, so during the period of lockdown, obviously the government introduced restrictions on evictions, and so we saw homelessness go down. We are expecting it to go back up now that those restrictions have been lifted, and indeed that we have intentionally homeless families in the system. We are aware of those families. We have very strong partnerships with the districts to identify the families, and also to provide that early support. Within our early help teams, we've got a dedicated team now that works with those families, linking very closely with the districts, both in terms of prevention and also in terms of moving families on as fast as we can into appropriate housing. That team's been up and running now for probably about a year and is having huge success rate in really tackling that homelessness. But what I can confirm is that we have a very clear procedure and partnership in place with the districts to make sure those issues are addressed. On the EHCPs, I think you raise a really good point. We are working really closely with our schools and our parent carer forums to make sure we're getting out information to parent carers, not just through our local offer or by writing to schools and asking them to pass our communications on, but we're using social media, we're using Facebook, we're using Twitter, all arenas that we can to make sure that parent carers know how to get help if they need it. I know that there's always more that we can do, and we are constantly striving to be agile and to make sure we're reaching out to those, including those who we can really be challenged to reach out to sometimes. But I am confident that we are getting our message out there. We are directing parent carers to our local offer. On our local offer, there's a whole range of support, as well as our helpline telephone numbers that parents can just pick up the phone and phone us and talk to us. So we've got flexible and agile arrangements in place to make sure that parent carers know how to get that help.
Thank you.
Teresa, you're on mute.
Again.
Sorry, I'm trying to be helpful here. So Matt, how are families coping? What are staff saying? And what are you hearing about from the BAME community, both staff and families?
Okay, I mean, I guess the families that we work with are representative of sort of communities as a whole, really, and there's a range of emotions and issues for families. Some people have managed the process okay and not found the period too challenging, whereas others, for a range of reasons, have, whether that's impact on finances within the family, if people have lost employment, or whether that's issues of emotional well-being. And again, all of our care planning with families is individual. So, I mean, there are a range of, I guess, common themes. Obviously, a lot of families that come to our attention would be for reasons of domestic violence. That's not changed and potentially has increased. And I guess what the impact for where families are in or individuals are in significant situations of domestic abuse and violence is that during the lockdown period, for certainly people weren't able to leave family homes, and that was obviously a huge pressure placed upon people in those scenarios. And I think what we'll start to see as children go back to school last week and in the weeks to come is then again talking to teachers about home life, and we'll start to understand more and more about what impact the lockdown period had on children and their emotional well-being. So I think we're working really closely with all our key partner agencies, and we're starting to see what that impact is for families and children as time goes on. So I hope that's okay. In terms of the BAME community, the County Council have got a really clear diversion and inclusion strategy, that we've got a range of practitioners and managers working on all levels of the organisation. And really that covers a range of themes, not just around BAME, but all aspects of diversity and inclusion for HCC staff and for our communities. And again, really, the work that we did particularly during COVID, engaging with families around those issues, was when it was being talked about a lot in the press and the public around that members from the BAME communities could be more susceptible to COVID-19. So we were working with our own staff around that, doing individual risk assessments, but also looking and the impact for families and talking to families about that and what that meant for them on an individual basis.
Okay, fine. Okay, Matt, thanks. Jenny, you said you could add something around domestic abuse.
Yes, I just wanted to say that all during the period from March, there was a weekly meeting of partners monitoring data and information around domestic abuse. There were major campaigns out in the community, so showing where people could get help, everywhere from supermarkets to pharmacies, and that's ongoing. And in terms of that partnership, heavily involving the voluntary sector as well, and paralleling what we've been talking about as the potential pressure on services and the increase in people coming forward. So I just wanted to reassure the panel that that Children's Services have been involved in that partnership, but it's a broad partnership across the public and voluntary sector.
Okay, fine. Thanks, Jenny. Lynn.
Thank you very much. Can I just add, excellent report. The trouble with an excellent report always makes you want to ask more. So just a couple of bits, please, if I may. One is sort of a heads up on the increase in homelessness. The one that's not included in this is if the young children, particularly primary schools, are sent home to self-isolate and the parents then have to stay home to look after them, those parents don't get paid. So we are now looking at another group who could fall into rent arrears and all the other things that you mentioned. But I think we need to watch this as schools do send young people home. I was interested about the increase in inquiries to become foster carers. And I just wondered, because we know that ongoing the training and the support is going to be very different to what we normally do, because I suspect a lot of it is going to be virtual. Is it possible to keep that cohort and monitor it so we know whether that is working just as well, whether it works better in that way, or whether we lose more people? It's just a thought that we're going to be trying something very different, and it's always good to monitor that. Just two very quick more questions. One was about the Saturday school, and I wondered if young people are happy with this, as I'm sure some of them would like to get a Saturday job and have some money so they can go with their peers, or is it something they're quite happy to have a Saturday school? And finally, the HPCI, I always ask this question, don't I, when it mentions parent carers. Is this offered to foster carers and special guardians? Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. Jenny, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was going to take the fostering questions, if that's okay, as Marion's not able to be here today. So in terms of the inquiries, we're really pleased about that. There's been a concerted, supportive effort by the fostering service that's not replicated across the country, hearing from colleagues. And involved in that, and in fact, Graham McAndrew was at a fostering forum yesterday. Our foster carers are very much involved in supporting new foster carers. And in terms of monitoring, Lynn, absolutely. And Marion and Miranda Gittos, who's the head of service for that area, I've got a series of dashboards where they've modified it so they can monitor progress through, get feedback on virtual training. As you may be aware, the few social care flexibilities that are left are around that assessment of foster carers when we're needing to get health assessments and so forth. So we're feeling very positive about that, but very much take on board your comments around the support and monitoring, that it's an effective way of moving forward. In terms of HPCI, that's a parent care organisation for children and young people with SEND. But in terms of foster carers and special guardians, they have full access to the foster carer support and training, as do kinship carers, and that will continue as it was before the pandemic.
Okay, thank you. And Joe, I suppose over to you for homelessness and Saturday school potentially.
Sorry, I was just getting my camera on the homelessness. I mean, I think, it's a good point you raise. If primary schools do need to send year groups home, of course that impacts on parents. We are working really closely with all of our schools, both in terms of how they manage outbreaks and their outbreak planning and their resilience around that, and how they communicate with parents, but also so that through schools, we can identify and become aware of any parents or families that we are worried about, or that we should be worried about, and who indeed need additional support, so we can both signpost and provide early support. And there's a whole range of early help and prevention services in place, whether that's from homelessness, debt advice and money management, through to family support, that we can help families access. So it is really about making sure that parents and carers and schools know how to get that help and support when they need it. So that is in place. And as you said, it really is about keeping a close eye and monitoring this over the coming months, as we do indeed see outbreaks in individual schools. I'm not sure I can comment now on the Saturday school. Jenny might be able to, but if not, I think I'll need to come back to you, Chair, with an answer to that question.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so is that all right, Lynn? We'll come back on Saturday schools, or unless Matt, do you have anything on that?
The only data I've got, I'm aware of, is that was delivered as some of the feedback that children and young people had given, in terms of it's something they would quite like to do. So I think it's obviously down to choice, but it's been part of that ongoing engagement with our children and young people and what services and support they'd like to receive.
Yeah, so obviously the general question around Saturday schools is more sort of for education panel, but I say Joe can get something from Simon and feedback if that's okay.
Great, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Leslie.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you for all the hard work that the staff have done during this difficult time. And I'd like to ask what the response to COVID has been, if there have been any positive outcomes, like the interface with children that possibly like the technology. Have you got any comments on that? And also, how did the children looked after get on with their homeschooling? Thank you.
Matt.
So yeah, I mean, it's really important that we capture the positive learning, and we have done that, and we're doing lots of internal comms with our staff where we're sharing good practice. Certainly, one of the things that a lot of children and young people have fed back to us is they really enjoyed the sort of interactive use of WhatsApp to have quick chats with their sort of social worker, and I found that really beneficial, and it's something that we're going to take forward. We'll make sure that we combine that with sort of obviously face-to-face visits. But there's a number of benefits to that which are really obvious. You know, if you've got a child placed at a significant distance away, it's a really good and easy way of keeping in contact with them. Equally, if we've got children that are living at home still and we're working with them with their parents, it's a really, again, good way with the parent consent that we can sort of talk to children and young people in a way that they possibly find less threatening. So there's some definite learning around that. There's been some learning around how we streamline visits to families, particularly foster carers and residential homes, who have talked about the fact that during the lockdown period, the fact there were less people coming and going into the houses made it feel more like a home. So we've got some learning around that, how we streamline our sort of interaction and visiting to children when they're in care. So there are a number of ways that we've definitely learned, and there's going to be practice that we'll take forward into our new way of working. So, and then your second question was around
homeschool. How do they get on working from home?
Yeah, and again, I guess a broad spectrum. Some children have really enjoyed it, and the foster care feedback has been really positive, and that children have been engaged in that. And the virtual school have been really proactive in making sure that all of our children looked after have had an offer during that period from March through to the sort of the summer term. I guess our children looked after population represent sort of the general population of children, and that some children have been able to manage that, and some really did disengage and find it hard, and that's why, you know, we promoted as strongly as we could all children going back to school, and that's what we're doing now with our children looked after cohort.
Chair, could I just add a quick point on the
please.
virtual school, just to say, I mean, Matt's absolutely right. You know, children looked after have responded very well to the virtual learning. Indeed, that is something that we're learning from and thinking about how do we continue some of that offer. But I would also say that the virtual school very successfully continued to engage our looked after children both over the Easter break by running virtual residential in partnership with Berkhamsted School, which was highly successful. We had a really good uptake, and the feedback we had from our looked after children was really positive about how they engaged. Many of them saying they found it better to talk about what was going on for them, sometimes through a camera rather than face to face. So there's some really good stuff that came out of that. And then over the summer period, again, we ran two summer schools for our looked after children, one at Berkhamsted School and one at another venue. And again, they're really good uptake for different year groups, and some really positive feedback about their ongoing learning. We didn't just explore sort of academic learning, we really thought about their personal, emotional well-being and resilience, and worked with them to give them the opportunity to discuss the impact of COVID-19 and what they needed in terms of returning to school. So some really good learning that came out of that too.
Yeah, and just in relation to Berkhamsted School, they do want to continue working with us, and I think they've started up a grouping of schools around the country to work with children looked after, which is excellent.
Yeah.
And I also understand they offered one of our children a place.
That's right. They offered they offered, yeah.
Yeah, it's a wonderful outcome. So more power to our elbow, as it were, working with the private sector, which was some fantastic opportunities. So Dee.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got two questions. The first question is regarding return to school. Back on track and play your part. Has this been communicated to parents? That's my first question. And the second question is, detached youth work restarted again in early June, carried out by YC Hearts, in order to support young people with issues such as risk of engagement in violence, gangs, crime, antisocial behaviour, inappropriate risk-taking, mental health and emotional well-being. And of course, the feeling of isolation and loneliness, a lot of them have actually gone through regarding COVID. will this service be under review by YC Herts in case there is a local lockdown in Hertfordshire? And what can we do to help young people going forward if there is another local lockdown at all? Thank you.
Jo?
Terry, yes, Chair, it's probably best if I pick up. Yeah. So on the YC Herts, you're absolutely right. We mobilised our detached youth work offer, very much working in partnership with community policing and others to make sure we could identify areas or hotspots where there might be concerns and engaging in appropriate and safe ways. So through social distancing with those young people, it was highly successful. We are keeping that under review. We haven't stopped it. It's continuing alongside our broader YC Herts offer. So the group work activities, you'll know from the report that we did over 70 to 80 group work activities online during lockdown. We've continued that. We're looking at how we get those back face to face where appropriate, but also providing that one-to-one support as well. So there's a very clear offer in place for young people that we're concerned about, and it's certainly something we're continuing into the future. And if there are lockdowns in different areas of Hertfordshire, we will, of course, be making sure that our youth work service as a whole is on hand to both engage with any young people, but also to continue to support our schools and parents. So I hope that addresses your first point. In terms of how we've communicated some of the support out to parent carers, we have communicated that out. We've done that both through Hearts for Learning, so it's on things like schools access it through the grid, and we've obviously written direct to schools and asked them to pass that information out. It's on the local offer. It has been sort of communicated via social media, so there are lots of different ways that we and Hearts for Learning have been communicating out to make sure that people know about the help that's on hand.
Did you want to say any more on that, Jenny, at all? As I understand it, every parent in the county's received an email via their school
they have
on an update. I think that's really important. So every parent should have received it. And
Yes, and schools are in regular contact with parents and can assure you they will be right until after Christmas, I would think. So absolutely.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a little bit easier for us now in communicating wise, because during lockdown it's very difficult to actually get any communications out to families, but we do have the schools open now and we can use their email systems, so which is really useful. Hope that's all right, Dee. Thank you. Anthony.
Thank you, Chairman. I've actually received extremely good feedback from parents regarding communicating. So I'd just like to pass that on to our officers. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Dee. Anthony.
Teresa, thank you very much indeed. And indeed, that last comment, I mean, a lot of the information we received at the education panel very much complements the information we've received this morning, and certainly I think we were very impressed by the efforts that the county council were making to try and keep in touch with schools. And clearly that's enormous importance to children and to their parents. Three slightly disparate questions. One, on staffing, and I'm grateful for the information about the way the staff are being supported and reflected in satisfaction rates in terms of that they feel supported. Could I just ask, in terms of capacity, we've had, I think, one or two comments back through briefings about the efforts to recruit both former social workers but also others. Could I just ask how that is progressing? That's number one. The second one, and I sort of raised this at the education panel and was told to bring it up at Children's Services. The mental health support teams, which we, I think, received a report about probably about a year ago, but also probably going even further back. What has happened and what is going to happen to those mental health support teams? There were, I think, 2 up and running. One, all the feedback I got was very successfully in St Albans, and another one in Broxbourne, and a third was linking up special education schools. What's happening there going forward? And the third question, we think have had some information previously about how children looked after are then supported through, I believe, to the age of 25, but I may be wrong, in terms of if they need support, having moved out of their foster arrangements. Is there an anticipation that perhaps those children who maybe, well, they're not children, they're adults, they're 18, they're 20, 22, 24, are actually amongst the most vulnerable in terms of going forward and likely unemployment or not having their jobs renewed? Are we able to support those young people who may again feel themselves very vulnerable?
Okay, so if we can give Matt about staffing and the recruitment, and then Jenny, can you perhaps talk about mental health and the care leavers? Okay, Matt.
Of course. So yeah, we've run a number of different strands since the beginning in terms of trying to sort of recruit staff into the service. So we ran a campaign looking at targeting either retired social workers or people that left Hertfordshire County Council. And so we did that piece of work. It didn't generate a massive response, but it generated some, and we've been able to recruit several workers. And then we've subsequently started a recruitment campaign to look at having a team that we can move around the system. And that's a combination of qualified social workers and alternatively qualified staff. So different sort of skill sets. And we've recruited already between 15 and 20 people into that team. They're going to work across different parts of children's services and be really flexible for us. And that really is a response to the anticipated increase in demand for services. So that's been a really successful piece of work led by a head of service in Joe's world and a head of service in my world. And then really quickly, in terms of your question around our care leavers, the care leavers service sits within my responsibility now, and very much in the same way that we've been monitoring and supporting all the children that are under a child need or child protection or children looked after. We've been really closely monitoring and having regular contact with our care leaver community, much more than we would have done previously. And for some of those people, because they're adults, they haven't necessarily responded to that, but we've had a high percentage of young adults that have, and our personal advisors that work with those care leavers have been doing a really fantastic job of keeping in touch with them, because we do recognise, as you've said, that they're a vulnerable group that are potentially going to lose out on career opportunities because of the type of work that they may be involved in. So we're doing a huge amount of work with that care leaver community to really understand the impact of the COVID pandemic and then respond to sort of individual needs of those young adults. I hope that is clear. If I hand over to Jenny for the mental health question.
Yes, so we were successful in Hertfordshire at getting the third wave, so another wave of support mental health in schools, teams, and that does include a special school. So obviously that was a bit delayed. The announcement came just before the pandemic, so that will start picking up again now. But I'd also want to say about the DFE project around mental well-being for schools and the training that's going to be offered to our schools around supporting young people and lower level anxiety needs. And that's a programme which is kicking off this term, and a programme of training. So a variety of things that are available. And Joe's already mentioned the pack and tools and support that's come from the Educational Psychology Service as well. And public health, we put a lot of information around where people can get advice and support, so out there, as well as supporting public health and YC Hearts doing at least 2 surveys of young people about how they've been feeling and where they feel they need support. So a variety of things, and which have included engagement with young people about what they feel they might need as well.
Okay, fine, thank you. Fine, and final question, I think, or comments are from Mark.
Yes, they are actually comments, Terry, because I've had a list of things I was going to raise and I've been putting lines through them. Virtual school was going to be one of my favourites because it didn't get a particular mention in any of the presentations. But thank you to all the other members of the panel for the quality of the questions they've raised. I think it's been a very thorough review, and thank you also to the officers for the depth and you know, the breadth of what they've told us about today. So really, well, one specific question, which was about funding. We've been told it's going to be 15.9 million. Well, it's looking like it could be 15.9 million. Is there any way this is going to be offset by any government funding? And is this going to set a pattern, do we fear, for future years? But the other one is just what strikes me about the whole of what we're learning about on the positive side, and I like to stress positives, is this, I think actually Joe used the word agile working. And if anything has come through from all this, it can be positive. It's the use of better communication tools, you know, new IT, and a new, I think, openness to working in a different way. And I think that is all the members of the service need to be congratulated for that. And I guess my question following from that is, you know, can we be sure that our young people are fully resourced to be able to take benefit of anything that we bring in? There's references to laptops being provided. Will we look at that as part of a strategic way forward, that we make sure that we have our young people properly equipped so they can work in the way that we're obviously beginning to work and will surely develop? I think that's really what I wanted to say, but many thanks to all the officers for all the work they put in. It's been a remarkable effort over the last 6 months.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Jenny, would you like to talk about those 2 points?
Yes, if I pick up the technology first, certainly, Mark, I can assure you that we won't, what we've learned, we won't go back on. We're embracing that whole range of ways staff work, but also how we engage with a whole variety of partners, as well as children and young people and families, and capturing that learning, the pluses, but also the challenges as well, and particularly around, we're regularly auditing, as Matt said, the quality of work that we're doing, particularly in our safeguarding services, and doing that in partnership with the Safeguarding Children Partnership. In the funding, there's been previous reports to Special Cabinet, but also I know a report coming to the Resources Panel about the Council's position and the impact of the pandemic, as well as things looking forward. And we would hope probably by the end of October to have a fairly realistic idea of what the risk is for children's services. But as we were saying earlier, you know, we're predicting this pressure to last well into next year. And the process here has been very transparent in ensuring that children's services do have that support. You know, quite rightly, the focus has been on adult health and adult social care in those early months of the pandemic. But the impact on children going forward, as we've heard in various reports today, is something that we really need to support and respond to. And we have the comprehensive spending review coming up, and I know Hertfordshire County Council, Local Government Association of Directors, and a variety of people are putting in information which we hope will be taken notice of.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. Could I also add around funding, as Jenny says, the LGA is putting in submissions around what they see local government funding should be, but in particular the Children and Young People's Board there are pushing for a child-centred recovery. So there's a large piece of work that's been done by officers at the LGA to feed into the LGA submission around putting children first. So we'll see how that goes. Quite an interesting piece of work. I'm hearing noises that potentially there might be a fourth wave of money coming to local government. When that might be, I don't know, but we're all keeping our fingers crossed so that we can fill the gap as it is. In relation to computer equipment, etc. I mean, I know we've bought some, and the virtual school did really well. But just for any of you, any from members really, if you work with charitable organisations or know of any charitable organisations within your hometowns, could you have a conversation with them to see whether they might be able to help fund or supply, or even businesses actually fund or supply equipment for our children? any children looked after, that would be really, really useful. And I think that's why we're going to have to look for that type of piece of work we want to do. Make sure they're all well resourced. I know that did go on during lockdown, but now we're coming out of it a little bit. There might be some more funding there, although I know funding's difficult. But you never know, businesses might have some spare laptops going. Who knows? So can I just make absolutely sure, please, that there are no further questions on that particular report? Great, thank you. Well, I think that was a really excellent conversation. We only had a few items on the agenda today because we wanted to do justice to this recovery, the COVID response of the department, because actually, even during special cabinet, we weren't able to fully report on children's matters as much as I might have liked. I didn't use chair's discretion with that, but I think we've heard a great deal today and about the great work that all our officers have done. And I think that our children in care actually did quite well during the lockdown, and that was borne by some of the results that came out recently. You know, we have young people who passed their GCSEs and A-levels to get into university, which was really great because that was a struggle for many young people. So excellent work being done across the piece, I think. So just moving on, any other business? None has been notified. The next meeting is the 10th of November. Now, today, we have agreed in the past that we would start meetings at 9:30. Today started at 10. I do know that the November agenda has several items on it. So could colleagues give me some comments on whether they would prefer a 9:30 or 10 o'clock start, so that we can always make sure that we're finished for lunchtime? My preference would be an earlier start, but happy to hear from everybody. Nigel?
Yeah, I'm happy with 9:30, makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody that doesn't agree with 9:30? I think we'll go that way. So I've got a happy from 9:30 there. Who's that from?
9:30.
Yeah, okay. All right then.
So have Teresa, will we still have the one before?
But we'll decide about that. So officers, please note 9:30 we will start the 10th of November so that we can finish before 1 o'clock. So members can get to afternoon meetings. Okay, well that's that for today. Thank you all very much for attending, and thank you officers for your very thorough reporting. I think members have found that really, really useful. And so stay safe, and I'll see you in November. Thank you very much.
Thank you.